We've all heard about the change of leadership under the regime of Nicolás Maduro. It was surgical, it was quick, it was an incredible success. But what does this mean for not only the region, the people of Venezuela, but what does it mean for Canada? And I think you're going to find this conversation fascinating as we talk about, well, really, the domino effect for this country. So this is a profound moment in history. So I thought it would be a great opportunity to talk with our friend, the Honorable Dan McTeague, because Dan not only looks at the world of energy as the president of Canadians for Affordable Energy, but also as a former Liberal parliamentarian, but also as a Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs. So a warm welcome, Dan.
Good to be here, David, and lots to talk about. Great topic, and glad to see people are paying more attention to it.
Well, I am too. I think this is a fascinating moment in history, not only for the people of Venezuela, but for the people of Canada. And you've often used the phrase, as I have, that this is a wake-up call. So we want to dare to kind of parcel this out and look at Venezuela as it relates to energy, but also in terms of, frankly, the clear and present danger to get this economy moving called Canada. So I want to look at this first off the bat, and that has to do with Venezuela. And well, first of all, were you surprised by the U.S. operation? It was a stunning event where you had some 150 aircraft carefully choreographed. I think they did not have a single casualty. But the removal of the President Nicolás Maduro to a prison cell in New York City. Were you surprised by this event, Dan?
Very surprised, and I think it caught a lot of people off guard. And I think it's the element of surprise that probably made part of that mission so successful without having to engage in a major war or casualties on the American side, certainly, and getting what apparently U.S. courts had wanted. And I think there's many people there who doubt it's about drugs, but if those out there want to quibble with that, that's fine. But there's no doubt that Nicolás Maduro was not the duly elected president of the country, nor did he have the legitimacy beyond abuse of power and the banning of the opposition, as well as his predecessor's suppression of the Constitution, Hugo Chavez.
Indeed.
So yes, I was surprised, and in more importantly, the sort of lackadaisical approach by so-called energy experts, never mind geopolitical experts, who thought this was a nothing burger and nothing could be, as it was proven very quickly, nothing could have been further from the truth.
All right, so we're going to look at that because when we look at the history of Venezuela, it's fascinating. It's an incredible country. I believe it has the world's largest proven oil reserves. It has, in fact, the largest reserves of gold as well, among many other minerals. The country has also gone through a really tragic story. In fact, in 1950, if memory serves me correctly, Venezuela had the fourth highest per capita income in the world at that juncture. It's almost like a kind of a Argentina story as well. And then it went into massive decline as the socialist communists came into power under Hugo Chavez. And I know that you had some experience seeing this up close as you actually went to the country in your portfolio. Can you tell us about that?
Well, twice actually. One to deal with concerns about Canadians abroad, and the second, of course, after my time in politics, trying to estimate the overall impact of years of Chavez slash Maduro on the decline in oil activity and its exports, in particular to the United States, as well as the timing of the closure of or the takeover of Citgo, the very famous refinery and complex in Texas, which of course had been pretty much taken up as collateral for the amount of damage and theft by the Maduro government of the two players, Exxon and ConocoPhillips, as well as threats made a little later on to Chevron, which decided to make some kind of a deal with PDVSA, which of course is the the national oil company, but very much in line with what was also happening in the neighboring Guyana. I was working on a project to restore ICAO accreditation to the airport in Georgetown without getting too distracted, because of course Exxon had discovered with others massive amounts of oil off the coast of Guyana, the so-called Liza projects. Nevertheless, what it did suggest to me was that the decline also coincided with Canada's opportunity, which was done by skill and design by some Canadian pipeline companies, notably Enbridge, to turn around oil. So people understand oil went from Venezuela. Venezuela then brought it to various refineries in Texas and of course in Louisiana. And what wasn't refined there in the U.S. Gulf Coast, home to 50% of all the petroleum production in the U.S., was then sent to Cushing, Oklahoma, further up a pipeline. So the pipeline actually went north, dropped off added barrels of oil, which became part of the proverbial marketing hub known as West Texas Intermediate. And of course, from there, could potentially go into the U.S. Midwest. Canada by 2014 was quickly obviating the need for that pipeline to move north. It was empty. Therefore, they took advantage and were able to secure through several lines, not just the Enbridge line, not just the Platte line, not just, of course, the Epsom line. We also, the Flanagan line, all these things turned from Illinois, making their way back south. So Canadian oil was eventually making its way not just to the U.S. Midwest, where we had a very strong presence. We sell about 2.4 million of the 5.1 million barrels that we produce daily. Almost 900,000 barrels made its way back to the U.S. Gulf Coast today. And so all that was very much, is very much in play now. And as we displaced Venezuela a dozen years ago, it's likely that these days now, there is now a scenario where that Venezuelan oil could come back and displace our bridgehead in those very important.
Okay. So Venezuela is not a distant oil player now. They are actually within this larger oil system. I mean, obviously, our energy system between Canada and the United States is highly integrated. But Venezuela is reappearing. So what are you saying then? That the reappearance of Venezuela is potentially a very significant event for our energy industry. Is that your thesis?
Well, look, 12 years ago, it produced 3.5 or more million barrels, 3.4 million barrels of production a day from the Orinoco Belt. That plummeted to about 900,000 barrels, of which almost all of it went to China up until last Tuesday, at which point China walked away, was told to walk away, take a hike. And now that what is left, a quarter of what it used to produce is now going likely to be not just earmarked for U.S. refineries, but more importantly, to be sent to the Strategic Petroleum Reserve in Louisiana, a series of 5, 6, 7 wells, salt wells that are used to maintain geopolitical stability for the United States, to make sure that it had 75 days worth of energy should it face the embargo as it did post Yom Kippur War in 1973. I don't want to go back to the history and all this is well known, but it looks like the Americans now have a reliable, effective source that will continue to be able to bring its product back online, not just in terms of the 800,000 that no one gave any thought to. Remember, ours is 900,000 to the U.S. Gulf Coast. Now that could make its way back to the United States, and importantly, with gradual improvements. And some of it doesn't require massive amounts of money. The removal of sanctions on diluent, which is the way in which you get that oil to flow by getting lighter oils or fuels to be mixed in so you can pump it easier. And the removal of the sanctions on vessels is half the battle. It's possible that within a year we could see Venezuela go from 1.9 million barrels a day to 1.4, 1.5 million barrels a day, and all of that likely to head to the United States.
Okay, so this is quite a story that's happened maybe, beneath the radar. But Venezuela has been a significant oil player in the world markets, and it's withdrawn as you have had a communist government come into play and basically screw up their oil system. But their production here has gone steadily downward from 2014. It's had a sharp decline. And in that place, is it fair to say that Canada, on the other side of the supply side, has been increasing its supply. And that's been part of the incredible success of the Canadian energy industry. Is that what's gone on? Is there's basically been a swap from Venezuelan oil to Canadian oil. And now
Yes.
Venezuela is reappearing again.
Well, yeah, and we did take advantage of that. And we also took advantage of another factor that doesn't get disclosed. Why did Mexican oil, which once made its way to the United States Gulf Coast, no longer become relevant? Because, of course, salt and contamination of water made their product less enviable. And so Canadian oil became a real option with no ethical issues involved, and its ability to be done and scaled up very quickly meant that not only could we displace Venezuela, which could now, ironically, in turn displace us, it is made in such a way that of course, the price was extremely extremely helpful. $57, $58 for WTI. Western Canadian Select, $44, $45 a barrel, and I think that's one of the main reasons why it became very, very attractive. The other thing too is that we have to remind ourselves that throughout this period, 2005 to 2015, American refineries, especially in the U.S. Midwest and the U.S. Gulf Coast, spent billions of dollars reconfiguring the refineries and updating their cokers so they could take heavier slates of oil. Why is that important? Well, not only did they make the investments, the United States was concerned about diesel. Despite the fracking revolution, the hydraulic fracking revolution in the United States of the mid-2000s during the same period of time, light, tight shale oil makes great gasoline, but it doesn't do anything to make diesel, asphalt, or any heavier slates you need to run your economy. Diesel is the global workhorse when it comes to fuels, and having Canadian oil, whether it's Venezuelan, Canadian, or Mexican oil, is absolutely indispensable to Americans. And regardless of the rhetoric, you either get it from Venezuela, you either get it from Mexico, you get it for Canada, or you basically shut down your transport infrastructure.
All right, so Western Canadian Select is similar to that Mexican crude in some areas, and also Venezuela. It's that heavier crude that's so essential for diesel production. Is that correct?
That's right. And by the way, so our audience understands this. If you see the word API, it's the gravity of API. And the lower the API, the more dense, the thicker it is. The higher the API, the less thick it is. And some people think it's great if it's over 30. Canadian is somewhere between 15 and 25. Venezuela is between 8.5 and 15 or 18. So, they have heavy oil. We have heavy oil. Theirs might be a little more difficult to treat, but when you got diluent, you've got pumps, and you also have a lot closer. The Orinoco Belt is 150 kilometers away from a port. We know our oil sands are several hundred kilometers away from any potential port, and there are. I mean, some people talk about the dilapidated state of pipelines and infrastructure in Venezuela. Yeah, but those pipelines exist, unlike Canada, except for
right. So when we talk about Venezuela from an energy perspective alone, this is really a wake-up call for Canada to get with the program to diversify our energy exports. I mean, none of us have a crystal ball in terms of exactly how quickly Venezuela will get back online fully its oil or energy potential, but it's already being diverted now to American refineries. You have the U.S. President Donald Trump meeting with senior leadership with all kinds of parties in the energy industry, talking about how they rebuild this industry. So this is a clear and present concern. Is that right, Dan?
Well, it is a present concern. It's a question of at what price as well. I mean, if the cost of getting most of that oil out is simply the cost of infrastructure and royalties to the Venezuelan government, I think that would have to be negotiated, less the amount of theft. In other words, these companies may very well come in and say, listen, you owe us X billions of dollars. Rather than paying us, we're going to take this many barrels out and get it for what is essentially free. Now, a lot of people don't like that concept, but that's the reality of what's there. And in fact, it's just sitting there on the edge of the Gulf of Mexico, much easier to get to the United States by ship than by pipeline, as we know. And pipelines are efficient, but they don't carry. You don't have super tankers that can carry half of 800,000 barrels a day or something like that. The reality, I think, for all of us here is that we have to recognize that while we are thinking of new markets to expand our oil in order to get more money and revenues and economic activity and help increase the support of the Canadian dollar, we now risk the very market that we once took for granted, and it could happen in much sooner time than we think. Contenting ourselves with people who are new experts who think they know everything about this stuff and are relatively new to this issue and like to provide charts and all sorts of those whiz-bang things, but they don't take into account the massive context, a context which I and some others have been able to provide, not just with our knowledge of what's happening here in Canada, but we've actually done the hard work, visited other countries, understand foreign policy, and understand energy impacts.
Exactly. So this is a clear and present danger for Canada not to take the U.S. market for granted. And it's interesting. Help us understand better the absurdity of Canada's energy situation, where we have one primary customer, named the United States. And at Frontier, we've certainly done a lot of research on this. We have that, energy differential counter that we show for illustrative purposes. But we basically don't get the full market price because we are a price taker, not a price maker. Can you explain that to us and why that means a lot to Canadians and our standard of living?
On the one hand, we have put all our eggs in one basket. We've refused to really diversify to others. And where we did decide to make a pipeline potentially available to other markets, east and west, we've pretty much put a closure to those many projects. And it's not just, of course, oil, it's natural gas. And having the United States, the positive side as a market isn't a bad thing, proximity being one factor, but it is the largest consumer of petroleum products and oil and hydrocarbons in the world. It's not China. It's not India.
Yes.
It's the United States. China consumes, 18 million barrels a day. United States, still 21. The United States produces 13.5 million of its own barrels. That means it's short 7 or 8 million. Most of that comes from Canada. And it's a number that I think should be a take note moment for most Canadians, especially as we recognize that for every million barrels that we send to the United States, it represents $20 billion plus annually in economic activity. That's revenue for the federal government, the provincial government, the municipal government, and it pays for our social programs. Whether you like it or not, want to be cute and trendy and have your elbows up, think about it next time you go to a hospital and recognize that what we sell to the rest of the world, not just the United States, really is the vanguard of our prosperity.
Exactly. So Canada has a lot of ace cards, and it all is kind of centered on natural resources, and that begins with energy. That's our largest industry in this country.
Yeah, your service sector is 70%. A lot of people not in the productive side of things. They're good jobs, no doubt, and they're very necessary jobs. But if you don't have people, raising money, paying the bills, you can't have that 70% being very effective. You can't have healthcare. You can't have public safety. All of these things have to be based on our ability to produce wealth and to be able to trade with the rest of the world. And what does that mean? Well, look at the Canadian dollar. It takes 140 pennies to buy a US dollar. It's a sign not just of of the United States being the attractive currency. It's that the weakness in the Canadian dollar is leading to a substantial decline in our purchase power. So it has enormous implications for governments on a number of fronts. But the fact that crude, oil, natural gas tends to lead that export by a wide margin, any other industry, including the industry I came from, the automotive sector, should be an opportunity for Canadians not to contemptuously and ignorantly think that maybe it's something we could leave in the ground or simply forego. No other country would do this to itself. Certainly not try to decarbonize the very thing that not one but 12 nations have come to our door, knocking on our door, saying, "Can you? Not other countries. Can you provide this?" It also hurts us when we recognize that we're selling natural gas for $2 an MMBTU in the United States. They're selling it with LNG, produced in some of the hottest places in our continent, and through liquefaction, which is highly energy intensive, to Europe for 15, 16, $17. We truly have left ourselves in a position of being drawers of water and hewers of wood because we've embraced the folly of net zero. And that is our fault line as a country, and it's going to continue to be a real problem. I think to a large extent, an economic existential threat to the nation in the months, not years, to come.
Indeed. So but just help us understand then your perspective on the recent MOU between the federal government and Alberta in this case.
Too little, too late.
But surely, does that not offer a glimmer of hope that we're going to get pipelines built and infrastructure to markets and get this country moving again? Or is it just a big head fake?
Well, prior to last week, we needed to get one built to expand that sector and get the economy rolling again, because there's nowhere that's showing real signs of growth. I'm in Ontario here. Our manufacturing, our steel sector, not just because of tariffs, are on the knees.
Yes.
The only thing that seems
Right.
to be working in this country is where it's a federal government subsidy or grift. I mean, it doesn't work. You can't have a
Exactly.
nation of mooches if you're not producing anything. Someone has to do the heavy lifting. Someone has to bring home the bacon. And right now,
Hmm.
all we're doing is sitting back. It reminds me of a car battery in the middle of February. The engine ain't running, therefore you're wearing down the battery, and it's only a matter of time before everything shuts down. But that
Hmm.
aside, we've missed a great opportunity. The MOU is not a very good document, and however it was decided or agreed to, when you burden the cost of Canadian oil at $45 a barrel with the cost of building a pipeline, so add 60 billion, you then burden it with the cost of, can you believe it? Carbon raising the level of carbon from $90 to $130 a barrel. So you impose a massive carbon tax on it that'll cost about $10 or $11 a barrel,
Hmm.
and then you demand that it be in some way that we decarbonize it through sequestration, or called CCUS,
Hmm.
carbon capture and underground storage. However you want to call it, it's extraordinarily expensive. So add another $3 to $7. So that's $18 on top of 45. You're already at 63. WTI selling for 58. Good luck, Charlie. No one's going to buy your
Yeah.
thing. It's already
All right.
overpriced, and people need to smarten up.
So this MOU, from your perspective, then kind of represents a larger grand bargain that really makes the energy industry, at least on the oil side, uncompetitive, because they've got to do this, quote, carbon sequestration, if you believe that carbon dioxide is a pollutant, that will add significant cost to your product. And then, bingo, you've got another player on the stage. What is it called again? Oh, yeah, Venezuela, among others, maybe Iran sooner or later. And then all of a sudden, Canada is in the longer term. Again, we don't have a crystal ball, but in the longer term is very vulnerable in terms of its demand. Is that what you're getting at?
Well, they call it a bargain, but it's in fact, there's no discount here. It's in fact a very costly arrangement that no one's going to want to buy. And that's the big disappointment. We've priced ourselves out of the world market, and we better recognize that. It's because we demand in Canada, unlike Norway, unlike Saudi Arabia, unlike Iran, unlike Iraq, unlike even Venezuela or the United States, we demand that we be trendy and cute and clean. Well, that's
Right.
clean as it is. It's among the best in the world that we have, that we
Hmm.
know done to the highest potential out there. But the fact is, we're kidding ourselves if we think that there's going to be more buyers because we happen to make the price a lot more expensive. At the end of the day, the South Koreas, the Japans, the Chinas, the Indonesias, the Indias are going to buy based on availability and based on price. And on both of those fronts, we've not only neglected, now you have, another factor that we never thought of 2 weeks ago. You got someone else that's prepared to eat our lunch back in the market that we thought we had sewn up, even at $44 a barrel. We needed to make a decision this weekend, and it didn't happen. So if Mark Carney's going to go to President Xi Jinping with all his
Hmm.
authoritarian and all the human rights abuses and environmental abuses and try to
Hmm.
pretend that it's somehow good for the environment and go cap in hand and say, hey, would you like to buy some oil? I'm sure they would. But what's the price? Do we need more
Exactly.
interference in our
Yeah.
elections? Do we need to lose our democracy? Do we need to become really, if you will, do we need to become, a vassal state of China?
Hmm.
I think we have to
Hmm.
be very careful of the tectonic plates that are moving right now on the side of geopolitics. We need to have a Canadian policy. We don't have that. We have a leader who said he could do a deal with Trump. It's 9, 10, 11 months after, still no deal. And now he wants to cut a deal with Xi Jinping. I'm very worried for Canada. I'm old enough to
Hmm.
have relatives who fought the Chinese army in 1951 to 53 when they came over the other river, and it's
Hmm.
not a pleasant thing to see. I've been very concerned about that nation. It doesn't believe in freedom, democracy. Anybody who thinks that we can hang our hat and our future and thumb our nose at the United States at the same time
Hmm.
is kidding themselves all the way to losing their pensions and their quality of life.
Okay, so that's quite a summation, Dan. So if you think of the geopolitical situation and Canada's urgent need to diversify its trade away from the United States, it's almost like the United States is obviously a friend and ally, but it's also we need to govern in favor of our own sovereignty and interests. We've got to really hustle. This is a kind of an existential moment. I'm not trying to sound too dramatic here, but if we don't have a strong economy, you don't have sovereignty. I mean, this is the reality. So when we talk about the geopolitical shift here and getting back to Venezuela, in that region, we know that Venezuela was a nasty regime, all kinds of human rights abuses, torture. Some 8 million people left Venezuela. But we also know that they also had a whole bunch of nasty state partners in on with them, from the Cubans to the Iranians, Hamas, China big time. So if we had to summarize this, China was a key loser in this operation in Venezuela. But in this scenario, it's interesting that the United States is sending a clear signal that they will not tolerate, from a security point of view, foreign actors from the North Pole to the South Pole. I mean, that is all summarized in their national security document. So why would Canada engage on much, much closer relationships with China if we've already seen the signal that the United States is not going to entertain China in the United States' backyard, namely Canada?
Well, I think a lot of this has to do with presentation and posing, and trying to give people the impression you're doing something when, in fact, what is staring you directly in the face is a nation and a government, like it or not, for which we have we've done very well by, and they have done very well by us. That is, there's a level of discontent that I think Canada has failed to address. And whether or not it's the contempt with which we hold Americans, or that we somehow think that we can elbows up and ignore them and buy our own stuff, or maybe do more deals with the Europeans and the Chinese or other nations, that's all wonderful and it'll take years to happen. But there's no way you can get rid of the gravitas of the relationship, which is the greatest in the world. And we should be building on that, finding ways around it. I think at the beginning of this whole, it was very telling that the one who seemed to get some advantage in all this was Danielle Smith, and reminding Donald Trump that without Canadian heavy oil, the United States was rooked, and it would have no industrial military strength without Canada. But nevertheless, I mean, these are things where you have to bob and weave in geopolitics and in foreign affairs, and we didn't do that. And I think for that reason, we find ourselves in an even greater vulnerability, trying now to go on bended knee to other nations to come help us because of those big bad Americans and Orangemen bad. I'm not a fan of Donald Trump, make no mistake. But the points that he's raising about supply management, other things, cannot be ignored. I mean, I pay $7-8 for a bag of milk. In the United States, it's $2-3. Why should Canadians pay that much for dairy and cheese? We're worried about the grocery bill, and we don't seem to take into consideration that the Marxist ideal of supply management may have worked for a certain constituency, which happens to be those who are involved with keeping those quotas, but has hurt everybody else. That's not the Canadian way.
Exactly. So we're in a tough time here. We've got to reinvent our relationship with the United States, but also be clear-eyed in terms of our own sovereignty and what we need to do. So I want to get back to this MOU. So we've got urgent need to make these decisions around pipelines. Let's get back Keystone. Let's get it done. Let's look at variations of Northern Gateway or Energy East, all of it. So Premier Danielle Smith's deadline that was issued last week, calling for the federal government to make a clear decision about a pipeline in 6 months. Was that a smart move from your perspective, Dan?
My read of the MOU is that everything had to be decided by July 1st anyway. So I'm not sure there's anything that Danielle Smith is adding to this. I have to say, giving her credit in terms of saying we'll work with you as best as we can, but at the end of the day, we need to. As my grandfather said, you either do your stuff or get off the pot.
Yes.
It looks like
fish or cut bait.
Fish or cut bait. So, I mean, there is that. I'm also, though, deeply concerned by those who still think it's 2015 and net zero was a big deal. It's not a big deal. And it's crippling nations that have engaged in it. Don't take my word for it. Germany, big deal on. I have I happen to be fixing an old symbol here from a company called Mercedes-Benz. We all know this company. Well, they're moving out of Germany. They're going to Hungary because they can't afford the cost of doing business in that country.
Exactly.
What we need to recognize here is that there are policies that we thought were cool and trendy 10, 12 years ago when the country was flushed with cash and doing a lot better. We are on bended knee, not just in terms of our ability to, because of Donald Trump or because of China, We need to do things that are right for Canadians. If we're not going to promote and sell ourselves and get our product to the rest of the world, no one's going to do it for us. And anybody who thinks that somehow someone's going to come in with piles of cash and rescue Canada from its declining economy and its horrid economic outlook, despite RBC, which thinks everything's just fine. I don't know what kind of what kind of medicine they're on, but frankly, I'd suggest that they get a better apothecary. The reality for us is that we need to do things, and we need to do it very decisively. What is in the best interest of Canada, bar none, and that includes a frank discussion about where the majority of people lie, not just a couple of fringe groups and crackpots who go out there funded by, international organizations and foundations that want to, as it were, shut in our energy while U.S. and other nations just simply continue to plow ahead.
I think you're right. So we need to get on with those pipelines, the energy infrastructure. Are you concerned that the fact is that Canada does not have a trade deal with the United States? I believe it is really, quite frankly, astounding. If my math is correct, some 80 countries now have trade deals with the United States. The only two that have not finalized it, and I believe this is correct, are two countries. One is called China, and one is one is Canada with the United States. What does that mean, Dan?
Well, I think for now it's saying we don't really want to do business with Donald Trump. We'll do a deal with the Americans, but we have a bigger problem coming this year, and that's the end of the USMCA. I don't like to call it CUSMA because that sounds dumb to begin with, but
Yes.
It's
Right.
call it what it is. The free trade agreement with the United States, Mexico, is up for renegotiation. Maybe that's why we sort of held off, and we can't do something in the interim, so we're going to wait to the last moment. That could go either way, given Donald Trump and some of the some of the hype and some of the contempt with which we hold, Trump and the Americans means that we may not even get a deal there. So we have no trade arrangement with the United States, even though we're right beside each other. In the meantime, our situation isn't getting better. Their situation certainly isn't improved by what's happening. But it sounds to me like, we have to get realistic. This is not 1988. It's not about the free trade agreement. This is not 2015, where, as I mentioned earlier, we had everything going for ourselves. We've squandered our wealth and our goodwill with a lot of nations, most notably with the United States. And if you can't, as it were, bob and weave, as I mentioned earlier, and, roll with the punches, giving out as much as you can, then we are going to find ourselves in a very nasty situation come this year. Not in 5 years, not in 3 years, or waiting until Donald Trump is defeated or the Supreme Court says he can't put tariffs on us, or, maybe upcoming midterm elections in the U.S. I think it's a horrible way of conducting policy. We need to be very steadfast. In my time with Paul Martin as Prime Minister and Sean Critt saying we knew what our foreign policy was, we knew what our trade policy was, we knew what our goals were. I don't see this government as having goals other than talking about climate change. I mean, I say that ridiculously because I'm so sick of it. And I think Canadians had enough of it, and they realize they can't damn well afford it.
Okay. Yeah, no, an excellent point. So climate change policies are almost like, committing economic suicide here for our country. But I'm wondering if there's also another kind of philosophical policy plumb line that has emerged here. And that is, and you have that experience working with those previous Liberal governments. They believed that the key to the economic success was ultimately enabling the private sector. This current government, do you believe that they believe that that's what we need to do? Or is it just more government is the solution? They don't believe the private sector is really the key.
I was really amazed at the media last week, trying to make a purse up its salads here with those terrible job numbers. And when we a little further realized how bad it was for young people and realized that most of the jobs, again, were civil servants and healthcare, you can't run an economy by presenting the idea that more public servants, while the functioning part of the economy, the productive part of the economy continues to slide, is somehow a good news story. There is no good news out there. And we continue to think, oh, no big deal. The only economies, the only people doing well are ones that get handouts and are paid for and are provided support from taxpayers' money. The taxpayers broke. Taxes in this country are becoming oppressive. Doesn't matter where you are. And it's not just federal, it's provincial, it's municipal, it's everything else. The point that I'm making is that we don't have the ability to fall back on something. it'd be okay. And I remember the story because Paul Martin said it to my face. So did Fred say in 1998 when I presented a little report that they were very nervous about. It was called the Report of the Liberal Committee on Gasoline Pricing. You'll see June 1998. It was embargoed on that point. So sometime before June 10th, I had apologized with the Prime Minister and with Paul Martin separately, both nervous that what was in there was an attack, a frontal attack a la NEP, National Energy Program, on Canada's oil sector and its upstream.
Yes.
I said it had nothing to do with it, but why are you so nervous? And Paul, in his usual way, said very bluntly, if they don't build more pipelines, we get more oil to the United States, we are going to miss our debt targets. We're going to miss our financial obligations, and we will fall under the aegis of the IMF. We've gone a long way since then. Things have turned around, but starting in 2015, we squandered the wealth. We drained the silos in good times, and now we have nothing left in bad times.
Okay, so if I'm listening to you carefully, Dan, and I'm trying to listen very carefully, you're saying something that people may miss, and that is that Canada's very economic sustainability is going to be at risk if we don't get the basics right here, not just on energy, but as a place to do business. So we need the big reset on taxes, getting rid of the red tape and endless regulation that bogs down anybody who wants to start up a business here. We've really got to get Canada moving again. That's what you're getting at, isn't it?
I mean, you need to get the paddles back and jumpstart the heart. We've gone into a cardiac arrest in this country. Make it very simple, and we've put ourselves there. We voted for it. We thought nothing of it. We flooded the country with far too many people, unfortunately, who have been mistreated by the fact that the promise of this country just isn't there. We see food banks going through the roof. We see tent cities everywhere. And we are starting to see other facts. Labor GDP numbers are down. Look, one of the most important, and to make to the point why we need to act now, how much investment is going from manufacturing business into new equipment? It's gone to virtually nothing because no one wants to risk spending money in Canada. Where are people spending their money? Where are they investing their money? Outside of Canada. So the outflow is dramatic and the inflow. Our housing stock is not moving. Things are going down. I'm not saying that we don't need a reset on some of these things, but tell me where there's a single metric in this country, short of where you can get government grift that's government supported, that's showing signs of promise. I don't see it. Despite the Royal Bank of Canada coming out with what I think is a significant amount of, pardon my expression, turd polishing, there's no way under the sun. Maybe that's why they hired the group now that we all know, Eurasia Group, to do some of their PR going forward. But I don't think that's a very fair way of being honest with Canadians about how serious our situation is. And it makes it even more implausible that you're going to find leadership in the country that has a plan. Those who have a plan have been sort of set aside, and those with no plan who'd like to make a lot of travel around the world and big announcements have achieved nothing but zero to show for what they've done, with massive amounts of government borrowing and public money having been foolishly wasted on projects and programs and ideals that really have left the country in a very, very awkward position. And again, $78 billion as a deficit. I mean, I can tell you that would make
unbelievable.
The hair of most of us as liberals back in the 1990s curl very quickly.
Exactly. So we've been on a sugar high, and it's been a lot of government spending, deficits, record levels. So we need a reset big time. This is a clear and present danger to our economic future, let alone our standard of living, let alone our sovereignty. This is the irony. So Dan, as we kind of wrap up our far-reaching conversation, we know that the earthquake of Venezuela then isn't just an energy. It really underlines the importance of an economic reset for this country. So I want to just look a little bit creatively from a policy point of view as we look at history. And it kind of goes like this. I've had, like you, so many conversations with people who have a longer memory of Canada than I do. And I find it fascinating how our forebears really came and stepped up to the plate in terms of delivering policy leadership for these kinds of moments in our history. I believe, like you, that our country really desperately needs a reset to move us forward. Otherwise, we will continue to stagnate and decline. And I think of the analogy of wartime. I'll never forget a conversation I had years ago with the Honorable Preston Manning, and I asked him, so from your perspective, what were the best cabinets that really moved our country forward? And he said thoughtfully, based on his conversations with his father, the former premier of
Ernest Manning, yes.
Alberta, Ernest Manning.
Yeah.
He said that would have been Mackenzie King's cabinets, because they had this laser focus on winning and fighting World War II. But they also had extraordinary members of that cabinet that showed up for $1 a year, like C.D. Howe and so many others that came out of the private sector who knew how to get things done. And by golly, they got it done. And Canada made a stunning contribution to not just World War II, but basically it really showed that what a country could do if it put its mind and heart to it with courage. Are we not in a similar situation where it's time that we realize the urgency of moving these policies forward, Dan?
Well, there can be no doubt that, whether it's from Vimy de Falaise Gap to C.D. Howe to even Jean Chrétien pulling out Mitchell Sharp. Mitchell Sharp,
yes.
Last guy who ran us through the 60s, some very great periods of time. The father of Paul Martin Sr., Mitchell Sharp was brought back. Chrétien brought him back into as a $1 a year man, literally, as a reflection as to what Preston Manning has suggested were the best times. And did Canada punch above its weight? You damn right it did. Ask the folks at D-Day, why one country managed to get through where others couldn't, as what the Polish and the Canadians did, and I mentioned earlier, Falaise Gap. There's 1,000 examples of a country that was once assigned to the heap of irrelevance by Molière, the great French writer who referred to Canada as a couple of banks of snow and a couple of snowbanks of snow and a couple of forests. Nothing more than that. We've turned what has been an inhospitable place in one of the most productive places in the world, and we should be proud of what our parents and grandparents and their generations before us did. We do not have the luxury of despoiling that or sitting, as I saw some of my liberal friend boomers do. Oh, who cares? The next generation can pay for it. We have become lazy and selfish and indolent, and we've allowed a particular group of people in this country who made things bad in 2015, not in 2005 or 2010, but in 2015, allowed this country to slip away. No one has the right to do that. It's time to rediscover this country, get us back to where we need to be. And yes, stop being so arrogant when it comes to some of these trade arrangements. You may not like certain people in other countries. Too bad. That's their decision. Let's work within it. We're Canadians, and we've operated under far more adverse scenarios than this. Look, this is a country in the 1930s. My dad was born in 1930, Peterborough, Ontario. People starved. Cupboards were bare. So, we've got it damn good. And there's a reason we got it damn good. Now we have to get it right again. And let's do that. But let's not do it by blaming everybody else and playing these woke DEI, ESG, climate nonsense, DEF, whatever you want to call it, ideas coming out of Davos and other places. Let's have policies that are Canadian-based, that put Canadians first, that put prosperity as a guarantee. And if we're not prepared to sell our resources to the rest of the world and people want to stop that, by all means, go to some part of the world. But you are not going to block pipelines. And if you do so, then you should be prosecuted. You should be put away as in a jail or somewhere where you can't be of any harm to the interests of the many people out there. I'm a utilitarian. The good of the many in this country comes well before the selfish, spoiled, grifting interests of a handful of people who found a way to capitalize on a narrative that is damaging my country.
Well said. This has been a very powerful conversation, my friend, the Honorable Dan McTeague, as we look to 2026 and the choices, the policy choices that we face as a nation together. So thanks for joining me today, Dan McTeague.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me, David.
Here at Frontier, we don't receive any government funding. We are nonpartisan and we work for you. Find out more and support this important work by visiting fcpp.org today.
Thank you so much for watching this recent episode. We love your comments and we'd like to hear more from you. If you haven't, make sure you press this bell and subscribe to this channel. Check everything out. We'd love to hear more about your comments.